Okay, cool. Well, thank you everyone for coming by to this study session. I'm very excited and very humbled to be presenting this for you all. I'm not an expert in S3. I'm actually just barely learning. But when I saw the navigate the attention lesson, I thought to myself, well, that is something I'm very familiar with already. I'll give you a little bit of background where I come from, who I am, what I do, so it makes a little bit more sense. Um, Currently, within the Cardano ecosystem, I'm serving as one of the Intersect Constitutional Council members. I'm an alternate. I'm on the seat, though. I don't have any voting power. But I'm also very active in the marketing working group at Intersect and the government transparency working special interest group in special interest group at Intersect. Those are two of my big passions. I love being creative, and I love, not necessarily be transparent, but fighting for things that should have transparency, right? Um, and then as a member of the ICC, I'm just learning as much as I can from other members who are much more experienced and much wiser than I am. And I'm trying to help facilitate the process for the meetings and the communication strategy and what have you in any way that I can. So that's more or less who I am in a nutshell in the Cardano ecosystem. My personal professional experience, my educational experience, all of that has to do with writing. I've been a writer for my entire life. I have my degrees in creative writing. I got my degrees from the University of Texas at El Paso. Um, I did spend some time doing graduate study level coursework, but I never graduated with my MFA due to different reasons. Some of that coursework was in Spanish and in English, so I got the very unique experience of enjoying some bilingual classes at the MFA level, which was very enlightening, very eye-opening. And the reason why I bring this up is because when you're a creative writer, you get used to being dismantled, and I mean systematically dismantled through criticism. And it can be a very painful, very hectic, very ego destroying process that you just kind of get used to as you're going through your classes, as you're going through your degrees. And coming out of the other end of that leaves you maybe a lot less sensitive to criticism. Let me just put it that way. So, one problem that folks who have been through traditional academic creative writing courses have is that our feedback can be very, very harsh, and our criticism can be very, very brutal and very honest. And I have to always be mindful of that whenever I'm giving feedback to other writers who maybe have not gone through a similar training process that I have, or other members of a team that I'm working with who are not, who don't welcome that sort of very heavy-handed criticism. And it is actually something that I had to teach myself not to do, thanks to, I don't have any slides or presentations prepared. I've been very busy, but some of my books, right, like these manuals right here, Copy Logic. See, it stresses copy without criticism, right? It's how bad the problem is in the industry. Or books like this, How to Write Short. These have been manuals that have taught me how to be more patient and more calm and more collected in my writing. Or the Copywriter's Handbook. This is an excellent manual for helping you understand how to work with a team and having you have really good, useful techniques that you can just pull out to avoid sources of tension. And that introduction brings me back to what we're here to discuss today, which is navigate the attention. I would like to offer my perspective as a writer, as someone who has been deeply involved in the editorial and publishing process, in the drafting process, so on and so forth. And I would like to talk about the parallels between the writing process and what I've learned here in S3, the navigate the attention pattern. And I'll go ahead and share my screen real quick, but I wanted to give you all that that background so you understand where exactly it is that I'm coming from. And so that I'm making a very clear disclaimer that I'm by no means an expert in S3. I'm very much trying to just establish my understanding and what is already familiar to me. And if I am presenting something that is inaccurate or incorrect, or you can add more insight to, please feel free to let me know. I'm not going to be offended because I'm very much a newbie here. And if I can just figure out how to share my screen, I'll be just a second, y'all. Okay. So one sec, I've got to give this guy permission to share. Okay, it looks like it's asking me to quit and reopen, so I might have to pop back in and back out real quick. Is that all right with y'all? Or, sorry? I can't hear you, Nori. I think you might be muted.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, I'll be
technology
popping.
works.
Be right back.
Okay. And you're muted, by the way, Nico.
I'm such a mess. I'm sorry. Thank you, Nori. Can you all
No
hear me
worries.
now?
Yep.
Okay. I don't know how y'all usually do it, but I've shared my screen and it's here on the diagram and on the section for the sociocracy patterns. And I think for me, the most important thing was understanding what was meant by tension. And so I'll just go ahead and read through these step by step and kind of tell you how I processed them, how I understood them. And then if anyone wants to kind of come in and point something else out, please feel free to. So the navigate via tension pattern. Pay attention to tension you experienced in relation to the organization. Let me make that a little bit bigger. There we go. Okay, so pay attention to tension you experience in relation to the organization. Investigate the cause and pass on information about any organizational drivers you discover to the people accountable for the appropriate domain. So the first things that popped out to me is the use of tension, the use of the word organizational driver, and then accountable for the appropriate domain. These things immediately popped out to me. So I had to go understand organizational drivers within the context of S3. And I've got that open, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then understanding accountability within this framework, within this pattern, is actually something that I used almost immediately after preparing for this. When Juan told me that he would like for me to take his place, I started reading and preparing, a couple of days ago. And when I read this and I thought about it some more, I was like, well, this is exactly what we need in the marketing working group, right? There isn't a segmentation of duties or an assignment of duties. And so we don't know who exactly to hold accountable for certain things. That's leading to a lot of tension. Since then, I spoke with Simon a little bit, and he's helped to bring a lot of that accountability and that role assignment and that what would you call it? Just helping folks find their niche within the marketing group. I was gone for like a week because I'm currently in the process of getting my constitutional workshop together. But I came back and I found a much more structured group, and I do believe it is because he was using the principles in this pattern specifically. I'm sure in S3 overall, but specifically, it felt like identifying those organizational drivers, or I'm sorry, those sources of tension, and then finding out who is accountable for such and such and assigning them those duties has helped to remove so many of the obstacles to um, progress in that group. So that's kind of how I understood it from perspective of like the marketing working group. And I felt it was immediately applicable and has already been showing tremendous benefits to the group, having returned a week later to find much more structure, much more organization, and more people stepping up and accepting accountability for finishing projects or seeing projects through. It's fantastic. Um, so moving on. Challenges and opportunities for an organization are revealed by people reflecting on the reasons why they experience tension. I love this part. As a writer, this is probably one of my favorite things about it, that this pattern requires so much self-reflection. And in the process of self-reflecting on my work or on anyone else's work or on the work someone else does, you learn a lot about yourself and your preferences and what your values and all of these things. How can they sometimes be in conflict with someone else's preferences, values, so on and so forth? So understanding tension and your personal tension and the causes of that tension is crucial to being able to write well. If you are not comfortable, if you are finding yourself with writer's block, if you're not feeling inspired because you're having grief with your professor, or your peer didn't like your poem, or your copy was rejected for the 18th time, all of these things can be internalized very deeply and can be very demotivating as a writer. So I love that one portion there that's highlighted. Then moving on to step one, notice tension. In this context, and this is, I think, crucial, in this context, tension is an inner state of alert, a personal experience that's triggered when there's some kind of dissonance between an individual's perception of a situation, or what they would, or what they expect, or would prefer to see. I love the definition here. It's very accurate. It is an internal state of alert. If I read a piece of copy that I thought was great, but then it turns out that my reader doesn't laugh at the joke, that's going to send me into quite a bit of personal tension. And you can apply that, in many, many different fields in many, many different ways. So it's no wonder that tension can cause folks to come into conflict, obviously, and stop progress from happening because you think something's going to be one way and then it turns out to be a completely different way. I wanted a 16-word sentence, not a 150-page, charter. Is that kind of thing, which some writers can be needlessly prolific sometimes and miss the mark completely. Anyways, so tension, identifying tension, defining tension, understanding what it is to me was crucial. I feel like an inner state of alert, that panic moment. happens a lot when we're learning how to work together collaboratively. Again, sort of pointing back at the marketing working group at Intersect. There has been a lot of situations where there's been an interstate of alert because I don't see eye to eye with my colleagues about X, Y, and Z decisions. And it's certainly very evident that maybe sometimes they don't see the same thing as well. And so that tension can carry on into needless argumentation, endless debate, and a lot of wasted time and a lot of wasted hours. And indeed, that leads us into the organizational driver aspect of all of this, right? And I had to go and learn about what is an organizational driver, how to make sure that we're avoiding things that would cause us to go into an organizational driver. And this is crucial for producing clean copy as well, because if there are things that need attention, that need to be addressed, that need to be revised, that no one is picking up on the right spelling of a very specific legal term, that and then the thing gets published, and now all of a sudden we're in trouble because no one caught the legal spelling in Black's Law Dictionary of that specific term. Okay, that's an organizational driver that how do we let that happen? Who dropped the ball? How can we make sure those kinds of things do not happen? That's why it's crucial to be able to have this process through which we're able to identify these things that are wrong and say, this is wrong. You did this wrong, copywriter number two or whatever. Make sure you go back and you fix that. And this document is airtight and ready to publish. So that's step two. That's understanding the situation, right? Investigate the situation you are perceiving that stimulates tension in you. Sometimes this inquiry can reveal misconceptions, and the tension goes away. And that's if you guys can see the little diagram right here, right? Notice tension, understand the tension, and then if we go a little bit deeper, it jumps over to describe the organizational drivers, right? So notice the tension, understand the tension, jump over here to describe organizational drivers. What is the current situation you can observe? What is the current anticipated effect the situation leads to? Why is this relevant to the organization? Create a brief but comprehensive description. So I think this is fantastic advice for anyone involved in the writing process, anyone involved in helping to manage group dynamics, right? But it goes back to understanding those organizational drivers. And that's something I had to spend a little bit of time wrapping my head around because it's crucial to this pattern. That's step three. I'm going to jump here real quick. Step three. A simple way to determine whether a driver is relevant for the organization is by asking the question, would responding to the situation help the organization to generate value, eliminate waste, or avoid undesirable consequences? Going back to the copywriting decision or example, I get paid if my copy sells. I need to be able to make sure that it's generating value to my organization 100%. I cannot be redundant. I have word counts. I have, in some instances, character counts. I need to eliminate fluff. I need to eliminate needless waste from whatever piece of content that I'm helping to produce, and then avoid undesirable consequences. Let's go back to that Black's Law example of using the wrong term and creating a catastrophe because you've accidentally said something contractually that you didn't mean to say. Let's avoid undesirable consequences, right? So all of these things are, in my mind, akin to the writing process. These organizational drivers. I want to produce value with my content, whether it's marketing content or it's copy or it's a charter. I want to make sure that it's quick and easy to read and brief and succinct. I want to eliminate waste. And then I want to make sure that it's accurate, that it is grammatically accurate, that it is sound, that is logically cohesive, and I want to avoid undesirable consequences with a streamlined, well-produced piece of content. Um, moving on here, it says if you and this chart is actually brilliantly depicted right here that I'm about to read. If yes, then no. This section right here is what I'm about to read. It says here, if you think the answer is yes, it's likely you've identified an organizational driver that needs a response, right? If me as the head copywriter have identified that this aspect of the copy is the inappropriate term, and that term is going to cause us hundreds of thousands of dollars in PR, right? I better go talk to the person who used this term and make sure that they adjust it because we don't want to publish that article, that publication, that version with that specific error, right? So the head copywriter needs to know what he's doing. If you think the answer is no, you can ignore the situation and focus on relevant things instead. Maybe the head copywriter notices that there's an issue with the headline. But he's not the headline copywriter. He's just taking care of the body copy. Pass that information along to the headline copywriter. They'll take care of it, right? If you are unclear, investigate further, which might include reaching out to others who have a clearer idea. In this case, maybe the head copywriter reaches out to the a headline copywriter and says, hey, is there an error in this or is this what you meant to say? And the copy that's used for writing headlines in an article follows a different structure and different rules than regular body copy. In fact, there's even a phrase that was used to describe the old-timey newspaper headlines. I forgot what exactly that phrase is called, but it's a specific type of writing that was used to write those headlines that followed all kinds of really neat esoteric mechanics, and so I'm not an expert in that. I would have to go consult the expert in that. I would find who is accountable, who is going to be able to make the right call on determining whether or not this headline is proper. So this is how I process the organizational drivers aspect of this pattern. To me, there's direct overlap with everything that's done in the writing process. And anyone step in if I'm going too long or if you have any questions. But step forward is it in my slash our domain? If not, pass it on. I feel it's kind of spoke to that a little bit more, but this part here is really what I feel got implemented in the marketing working group, where we were identifying who's responsible for what, folks whose strengths are in art and copywriting and budgeting and whatever are able to self-assign or gravitate towards the tasks that require the best of them or that require what they have, and that is best for them because maybe they're not as strong a content marketer or as strong a whatever example you want, digital marketer, as they are maybe a secretary or what have you. Identifying these things, assigning the accountability, assigning the roles has helped our group eliminate, in my opinion, what is a lot of tension, what is a lot of needless argumentation, and we've been able to identify a greater value add, I think, for the Cardano community. If you step into the Discord now, I think that will be very evident with the structure and the organization that's present from maybe a week or two ago. Anyways, I will read this section. If it could be that a driver falls within the scope of a domain you're responsible for, head copywriter being responsible for body copy, for instance, in which case you'll want to place it on your list of priorities and respond to it accordingly. See, respond to organizational drivers. This sucker here is awesome. I can go on all day about this. You guys probably know a lot more about this than I do. But when I was learning about the organizational drivers and I saw this diagram and I read through it, I was like, okay, yeah, this is totally the process. I love it. It's great. I won't go too much into detail right with that yet. I want to finish the navigate tension slides and then open it up to chats and comments and what have you. But I love that section. There's more that I pulled open as well, and we'll visit them in a sec. Anyways, even if it does fall outside of your area of responsibility, it might still be something that you're best placed to deal with, or at the very least, you can take care of it without causing any impediments or harm. In which case, consider just doing it. This right here is going back to the head copywriter example. If you notices a very obvious misspelling or mistake in the headline copy, you're the head copywriter for a reason. Go pick up that comma, go delete that semicolon, go add the extra S. That's not going to damage or hurt anyone. Might as well just do it because it's much better to jump in and do that. Alleviate any tension that a misspelling in the final publication could cause. Imagine big dragon, small dragon, right? And this is very much what navigate the attention is. It's do I want to fight? Do I want to fight a small tension dragon, or do I want to fight a big tension dragon? That's on my mind. Also thought about it a lot. Um, Continuing on, it might not be worth the effort to go and find somebody else and explain to them about the situation if it's something you can simply deal with yourself. So in having assigned roles and responsibilities, one also needs to be aware of their own roles and responsibilities. What is my level of autonomy? What is my level of sovereignty? Might be too strong a word, but my level of supervision, perhaps within the group oversight. Like, what sort of executive decisions can I take on a team? The junior copywriter is not maybe going to be able to determine what the final formatting of the press release looks like, but he can definitely determine what that outline looks like. And if it's approved by the head copywriter, then that outline is going to be the responsibility of the junior copywriter. But then it'll ultimately, as a final publication, fall back on the head copywriter. And what's the head copywriter going to do? He's going to go ask the junior writer to revise the whole thing, or is he going to just highlight what's wrong and what needs to be fixed? In my opinion, that's the faster, more effective way to do it. And so it speaks to the idea of knowing roles, assigning responsibility, knowing who's accountable. And if you have the power to do the good and it doesn't hurt anything and it doesn't affect and it doesn't impede the flow of the organization, just do it. Just fix the darn grammar error and don't give the junior copywriter too much grief about it. Anyways, on other occasions, however, you'll come across drivers that are the responsibility of others to respond to. And that's That is where the major attention can come from, right? Going and saying, "Hey, pal, hey, buddy, Mister, or Miss, what would you say, like script doctor? I don't like the way you script doctored my text. I thought I had that metaphor was spot on. Why'd you cut out that metaphor? Blah 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 blah. Happens a lot when you work with poets and creative writers, right? Some things need to be tailored for brevity. I'm sorry, please forgive me, but you have to understand that we have a word count, so on and so forth. Anyways, so you'll come across drivers that are the responsibility of others to respond to. Therefore, to navigate the attention effectively, there needs to be enough clarity around who is responsible for what in the organization so that people know or can find out who to inform about the organizational drivers they discover so they can pass that information on to them. Right. Again, back to the marketing working group. Who's doing what? Who has this role? Who has this role for making sure the meetings are ready, making sure that people are welcomed and onboarded, making sure that we're talking about project catalyst proposals, that we're working on the budget proposal, so on and so forth. Understanding who is responsible for what can help us clear up an enormous amount of tension, but it can also be a cause of tension if the individual is reluctant or adamant that it's not their responsibility. And I think, how do you navigate around that, right? How do you make sure that going and saying, hey, I'm not responsible for this. This is something that you should be responsible for. And the other person gets angry or maybe, aggressive or hostile towards you for kind of calling them out. That part can be very, very difficult. And in a writing workshop, we deal with it by having an open conversation with our peers. If our peers have enough gumption to be very brutal and nasty with us, then it's something that they're going to receive from everyone else. And so, even though the amount of criticism that we do get in any given workshop can be very severe, it's kind of checked and balanced by the idea like, if you're going to be mean and if you're not going to provide valid criticism, if you're not going to do your role and help the individual learn from the things that you're pointing out, you're just doing this in a bad spirit, you don't have to be with us. You can go find another writers group. And you can come back later when you have some time to think about how you're addressing the group, in the group setting and what you're saying exactly. So it was always a very strong balance between being very, very strict with the feedback and the criticism and very severe and very, not severe, but very sharp, right? And being too severe, being overly strict, being hurtful, being needlessly painful. Understanding the difference between those two was crucial to our groups when we did these kinds of things. And it was always the responsibility of the workshop host to mediate the tensions between one writer and another. And that was always an undertaking. I would like to imagine that they used some of these patterns, maybe without knowing what they are or what to call them, to help defuse difficult situations. And that kind of, I don't know. Sorry, I don't know if I've
I
gone
just
on for
wanted
too
to
long.
I just wanted to jump in with the note that
Yes.
um, one of the sociocracy patterns that we've covered in the past few months has to do with the feedback process and the opportunity of a zone of responsibility that's like, well, we're responsible for delivering a result that this person's work is in tension with, can be a completely different way of framing the feedback process. So rather than pushing feedback at somebody, the sociocracy pattern is, as a group, how are we doing with regard to this goal that's being blocked by a problem of uh, like the one you're describing?
Yeah, no, that's great. So group feedback, it sounds like what you're describing, right, Randall? Can you, because again, you all have to remember that I am new to this. Can you tell me a little bit more about that principle and how it applies to I guess, our example of like a writing workshop session?
I wonder if I could put Jeremy on the spotlight for that one. If not, I
Yeah,
Go ahead, sir.
that's a strange call out too, because I have written a pattern language for writers workshops specific to these S3 patterns that we've been working on. I have a link around here somewhere. Um, the main thing would be to always remember the pull component. S3 and a lot of agile and the underlying constraint theory that and adult educational theory that's sort of underlying it is all about capacity. On one hand, you're building capacity by collaborating, working with others in a reciprocal arrangement where what you get back is learnings and things like that. But the group never asks for more than you can give, right? So the group sets up you can almost think of it like a vacuum. Like they create a domain, they delegate the domain, and you take the delegation and you're going to do something with that. The pull system is you being accountable for the work that you've done and reporting back to them within the capacity that you can do it. So in S3, when there's peer feedback, it comes from somebody asking to receive feedback.
Yes.
And they do that by requesting it from people they feel safe with, or they can kind of up the tension, like, because there's two types of tensions. There's functional and dysfunctional. The functional tension you build on. So they may feel like Nori's, like Juan saying he wants to be challenged and do another presentation. That's a functional tension that he can build on. And so he's pulling work to himself based on his capacity to take it. But if he was overwhelmed, that challenge acts as dysfunctional tension for him. He couldn't pull it to himself. He wouldn't have that capacity. That's overall the feedback pattern in terms of what you're talking about here just needs to be remembered as a capacity-based process where it's always a pulling action. You're always pulling it to yourself.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. See, and again, to be on full disclosure, I'm very new to the S3 system and still learning these things and still trying to find time to dedicate to study to these things. So any insights y'all have are welcome because they're just going to help me learn the system a little bit more effectively and create greater connections between what I am coming in with. So I appreciate you sharing your insight, Jeremy. That's really cool. I'm just barely now noticing that I can see hands go up. So you'll forgive me if you all had a hand up and I didn't see it. Did anyone else want to say something to Jeremy's statement or anything in the navigating the attention paradigm pattern? Sorry, there you go. Or should I go ahead and just continue on? How are we doing on time? We're doing good on time still, right? Yeah, I think so. Good, awesome. Okay, thank you, Nori. I did. I pulled up because I was just pulling links from here. Determine the requirement, uh, con consent, decision making, proposal forming, all of these things that are associated with the process of navigating the attention. And I feel like I read what you said, Jeremy, in here somewhere. I just can't recall where it was, but it was about being able to speak with someone who you trust concerning whatever feedback or concerns that you have with tension. Let me see if I can find out
It's one of the patterns called peer feedback.
your feedback. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking it might not have been what I pulled out here to read as part of this, but in any case, that it was kind of in that spirit that I proposed our writing exercise, right? The idea of like, well, these elections have caused tensions in the past, and we have these new committee elections coming up, and I wanted to see what I can do to make sure that we can avoid or at least try to navigate through the tensions we feel. And I dropped a little open Google document into the Discord a couple of days ago, inviting folks to just come and leave their feedback. The idea is I am making an authentic effort to try and gather feedback for Karen at Intersect, whose responsibility it is to talk about these elections with the community and get folks engaged and so on and so forth. But the first round of her trying to do that was very, very difficult. As you all know, the Cardano community can be quite harsh in what they have to say and how they size folks up. And I felt really bad for the poor lady because she wasn't ready for it. So this time around, I thought I might try to help bring some insights from a group of folks that are very well articulated and very intelligent and empathetic, and who would be able to like provide useful feedback without, really hurting anyone's feelings. And I see that some folks were able to respond to that document. And I encourage folks, if you have feedback or comments, or I mean, I guess this would kind of be outside of navigating out of tension. This might be more about the peer feedback principle that Jeremy just responded. But I am requesting feedback so that I can share this with Karen and we can have a better understanding of how to serve the community in a more practical and efficient manner. So I guess with that, I'll go ahead and conclude. That's what I have to say. The invitation is open to go participate in the document. I'm just gathering feedback. I'm really happy for everyone who has already put their feedback there. I'm very thankful for the opportunity to have shared my thoughts and the way I understand this particular pattern from the perspective of a copywriter. And yeah, I leave it the next couple of minutes or however long up to questions or thoughts or insights, or feel free to come and tell me what I did wrong or what I did right. That's all I got.
Awesome. Thanks for taking the time to think about that and sharing it with us. I think one of the principles of the S3 study group is we learn best by teaching. So it's fabulous that you stepped in so early to grab a pattern that you wanted to learn more about. And I guess I could kick things off a little bit. I think navigating by tension for me is kind of this wonderful way that allows us to get to that space where we can say, okay, this decision is good enough for now, safe enough to try, because down the road, we have navigate by tension as kind of one of our orienting mechanisms. So as a result of our decision or the things we're doing, something arises that we didn't consider. We're all kind of internally scanning our
Yes.
tensions to see if this is something that we need to bring up or not. And this kind of gives us the process to kind of navigate that way. And it allows us to push off kind of these decision points into the future for when something is truly coming up. And I know Jeremy has a lot of thoughts on this topic, so I'll hand it over to you, Jeremy.
Yeah, this navigate via tension is what I would consider one of the special patterns in S3. I had to actually reflect on this a little bit, because I was like, why do I think this like handful of patterns that I keep coming back to? Ask for help was another one that that I think is so special about it. And what I kind of tentatively settled on was that they're the ones that encourage individual autonomy. So you come into something like S3 and you're saying, what can I do? What can I do to help? How can I engage? How can I do something for the group? How can I produce something? You know, how can I be productive and useful? And the really special patterns like navigate via tension ask you to do something. In this case, it's self-reflect on something we all experience, internal tension. And so that makes it powerful to me, because it's a point where beginner, advanced, experience, no experience, you have a way to engage with it. You have an actual mechanism you can grab hold of and experiment with. You can try. We've done this in the past. We had a phase we went through where we introduced every single tension we thought of, and we quickly realized that's not the point of navigate by tension. But it was by twiddling the dials that we figured that out. And you know, it's okay to throw away a backlog of a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter. And that's kind of what we learned. These when you look at so in bold letters, if you scroll up to the top of the pattern, you'll notice I think it's step 1, in bold letters they put oh no, it's in step 2, investigate the situation, in bold letters. But that's all they have. It's not a link. It's possible you can find it in the glossary, but I don't think so. This is an important concept. Like, what is the situation that they're talking about? You highlighted it. It was you're experiencing whatever it is personally, but you have to figure out, does this have to do with everybody else or not? This may just be me. This may just be something I have to sort out on my own. The beauty of S3 and of organizations that are adopting them is typically, even if you're experiencing it, it's just your experience, there is help available within your ecosystem. There is help available, because if it's something that's holding you up from doing your work, that's a blocker and a constraint that might bottleneck somebody else down the line if you're not able to be as productive as you could be, or if you've taken on something you maybe shouldn't have, or something like that. So understanding those things is really important. I have a model. I'll share it after the meeting, I think, but a model for understanding the situation when it's a personal situation. When it's an organizational situation, I think you have to spread out quite a bit. But when it is a personal situation, you're trying to figure out, is this an organizational driver? Do I bring this up to the group? There's 3 overarching patterns that I believe kind of frame all potentialities in this situation. One would be memory, one would be knowledge, and one would be imagination. In the memory context, is the tension I'm perceiving, is what I'm sensing, is that because of patterns in my past that were maybe healthy or unhealthy, and I'm trying to avoid them? So it's this memory of something, and then your experience currently of reality creates a tension because you're not matching up. You're getting information from the present that's telling you, don't do this, or hey, we need to do this more. Why aren't we doing this more? This is great. Knowledge is similar. It's when there's something you know you need to know, but you don't know it. So you have your state of knowledge, your present state of knowledge, but you have the absence of something that you know you need to know.
Right.
And sometimes it's an unknown that you need to know, and sometimes it's an unknowable thing that you need to know, and resolving those tensions come across in very different ways. And finally, there's imagination. That's when you have a vision of the future, or you have thoughts about how things should come about, and you don't see it going in that direction. This isn't based on experience. Nobody's ever made a socially driven bonding curve for investing in protection of the commons. But when you see things moving away from that vision you might have for the future, you feel tension, like, no, we're losing a foothold in something where we're not going to be able to climb to this peak that I imagine, or whatever. So imagination, knowledge, and experience, or memory, are what I believe are the three different ways that you can unpack your experience of personal tension in a situation. And it makes it a little bit easier to pick it apart and dig into whether that is something you bring to the organization or something that you don't bring to the organization.
Yeah, I love
The other
that
aspect-
approach to self-assessment. Sorry, go ahead.
The other aspect of this pattern that makes it special for me is not just the enabler of autonomy, but also the enabler of collaboration. Because once you get past all those really interesting considerations that Jeremy described, you may have a moment of needing to then collaborate.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a
And this is
bridge,
an enabler
right?
of collaboration
Yes.
as well.
Yes. This is why I brought up the workshop experience, because if you can navigate the attention effectively with your peers, you come out stronger as a group, and then you have people who you can trust to review and evaluate your work, and you become a better writer as a consequence. I see Steve's had his hand up for a while, though. If we can get to him real quick.
Yeah, it's really interesting hearing y'all. I really like those 3 points, Jeremy. I agree, that's key on a really personal level. When I saw the topic navigating tension, it was really interesting to me that for you, Nico, that you were using your experience in this writer's workshop, because it's such a solitary experience, what you
Right?
write, and I've been practicing a couple of things, just as recreation. One of them golf, and that's a real solitary thing. And I'm best when I'm relaxed, but I get tense from my dissatisfaction, right? And those are just opinions, about things that it's a random thing, hitting a golf ball. You have no control over it other than general direction and whatnot. But like most of the time when I think about navigating tension, I think about it in a musical sense.
Mhm.
And so like in this group thing, right? I think of sociocracy, it's always about a group, right? And so, my favorite music deals with tension, and like there are a lot of chord progressions in popular music build tension and then resolve it in very pleasing and rhythmic ways, right? And that's common, right? That's what's common. When you get deep into jazz, jazz musicians, they don't give a fuck, right? Sometimes they will start from tension and it's nothing but tense all the way through, and the interesting thing to me about, like Pat Metheny, John Coltrane, they have songs with titles like Unity, and it's just chaos, right? But they title their songs Unity or something like that. And I've always found that just really ironic. And I assume they're being ironic. It's like, it's like looking at all the universe at once, right? It's just this
Right.
cacophony of shit, But, the other side of it is, people who, and I think I enjoy this more on a performance level, as people starting off and there's a theme and it devolves into chaos. And then, like with a good band, going at it from that, they'll go into chaos, and then one of them will take off in a solo that resolves the tension, and if they're playing an extended set, each each person will get the chance to resolve the chaos that they all create together. And I find those things really help me, when I'm working with people, and when I'm in my relationship with my wife, like I notice in a one-on-one relationship, like with my wife, that tension, it's like if I was writing and somebody was criticizing my writing, it's like they don't know. Well, then why am I pissed? Because they don't know, right? So it's
Exactly.
okay. I can either use whatever they're saying that makes me tense or not. I can either be mad or not. It's like what's the fruit of being angry? Yes, sometimes it's effective, but very, very rarely, you know. And so like from an organizational standpoint, like I think, like when an organization decides to do something new, you should, you go in as rhythmically together as you can, knowing that some tensions are going to arise because nobody has really done this before.
Mhm.
And then, like maybe somebody will step up and solo and kind of resolve that tension. Maybe the tension will just dissipate because everybody realizes the necessity of the tension is just in our imagination, like
Right.
Jeremy was implying. So I think it's exciting to think about tension in a group that's trying something new, because it's like a collective challenging type of situation, a collective challenge that everybody's taking on. And like there's one of my favorite songs from the 70s was a song that just built tension, built tension, built tension. Supertramp song Dreamer. It just builds and it builds and it builds, and they never resolve it. Okay, like the first time I heard that song, I'll never forget the first time I heard that song. I was like, where's the solo at the end? There
Right.
was no solo. It just fucking stops, the song just stops. And if an organization goes in a direction where it's just like this tension, when it gets to the point where you can't bear it anymore, well, just stop. Go do something else. Let's play a different song, or you know, give it a minute. Maybe somebody will find a way to tie the thread. But I appreciate this. It's nice thinking about it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I think
Steve,
that's, sorry, go ahead, Ronnie.
this is pretty quick, I think. Steve brings up an interesting point too, especially in jazz. There's like classic unresolved pieces because sometimes the beauty is in the tension itself. And we experience the same thing with what they're saying with S3. They're saying navigate by it. Like you don't actually have to resolve the tension. That's not what they're saying. They're saying that this is how you can find a next step for organizational goals. Specifically, that's specific to S3. You could apply this in your life though and say it's to achieve something in this area of my life or something in that area of my life. And it's this idea of the and both thinking, right? That another way of looking at tensions is that they're polarities. They're a pulling force between two ends of something that perhaps is an intractable difference: centralization and decentralization, autonomy and the group's efforts. We get these ends where we value something on both sides, and we see how we could use in a useful way we could be on either end of the spectrum, and the art isn't resolving to one side or the other, which usually ends up in some kind of choir of maximalism or something like that. It's finding tools, mindsets, other groups of people who will do this with you to navigate on these very difficult to manage spectrums where you need input from a lot of places, especially from the edges. So when you think of it in terms of polarities, then you have to think of it in terms of how many polarities are stacked on each other when you're trying to unpack something. And that's where the organizational driver in the S3 pattern really comes in, because it says, sure, there is a lot of complexity here. We have a lot of things to think about, and that could be, moving from one end of the spectrum to the other. And if you move the dial on one, it changes the settings on another because they're all interrelated, and it makes it very complex. But if you have domains And if you are delegating authority and responsibility via those domains, you always have a path available to keep moving forward. There's always this sort of iterative, experimental, piece by piece, bit by bit path that's available to you. And that's very powerful.
Yes, yes, I agree. I love what you guys have been saying and drawing the comparisons between the tensions and rhythm and music and the idea of catharsis and release. And that's also very true in narrative story patterns as well. You have moments of crescendos, narrative crescendos, where there needs to be a break in tension. Then often you'll have your comic relief come in and make a silly joke or trip on a banana peel or something because the tension gets relieved. But nothing about this pattern necessarily says it needs to be resolved. It's just how do we find our way through it? And I love all the points that you, Jeremy, and Steve brought up. And I think it's fantastic to draw those parallels. Um, I guess the final thing I wanted to say on my end, because I see that we're almost up against the hour, is that all of these, everything that I've learned from studying this and thinking about these things and how it applies in the various aspects of my life, the resounding consequence of applying this properly, in my opinion, in my mind, is growth. It's an opportunity for us to overcome challenges, whether they're at an organizational level or an internal level, and bring clarity to our situation and maybe find a reason to become better, better team players, better writers, better communicators, so on and so forth. So for me, the end result may not necessarily have to be growth, but it certainly can be when you navigate the attention. And that's it. That's all I got. I'll go ahead and mute myself now.